Welcome to episode 68 of The Real Deal, where real estate meets real life. I'm your host, Janine Igliane, with my co-host, Ryan Hatcher.
What's up, guys?
And our guest today is Robert Larson. And Robert's been an attorney for 22 years. He graduated from ASU and got licensed in Arizona in 2003. His law firm is called the Larson Law Office in Mesa, Arizona. He's been an attorney for 22 years. You started your own firm in 2010. For the first 10 years, he focused mostly on family law, such as divorce and bankruptcy. And the last 5 years, he focuses less on bankruptcy and more on estate planning like wills and trusts. So welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
And it sounds like, okay, divorce, bankruptcy, like those are heavy things. Estate planning, though, that's kind of cool. And I honestly think a lot of people don't do enough of that, especially at a young age, right? They think, okay, when I'm older. So I really want to dive into all of that too. But before we do that, we want to start at the beginning. How did you get into law? What made you want to get into law? We want to hear your story.
There's nothing exciting, but it just seemed like it was something that would be a good fit for me. I had an uncle who was an attorney, and he had an office in Mesa for many years, and I saw what he did, and I saw the freedom he had by running his own law firm and being a business owner, and I thought that would be something I'd want to do.
Yeah.
And so one thing that was kind of fun is, at least for the first several years after I opened up my own office, I would run into him at the courthouse. He was still going even in his 80s, and so that was kind of fun. But
did you ever work with him?
Not with him, but it was fun to kind of see him at the courthouse sometimes.
That is cool to like rub elbows.
Yeah.
So I want to ask this. My 16-year-old has thought maybe I want to get into law. What are some good traits or maybe some qualities of someone that's interested in becoming a lawyer? What would you say?
I would say just preparation and just being determined. I don't think the law is something that, it's not rocket science. I think there's some kinds of careers where you can either understand things or you don't, like in science or math and things like that. But with the law, if you're determined enough to understand things and do a good job, you can get it done.
So you don't have to be a good arguer.
I don't think so. I think you have to learn how to think logically. And so I know a lot of times in college, the people who advise things on, the advisors, I guess, a lot of times they'll say to take classes in philosophy and things like that. It's not necessary, but just being able to think logically and comprehend things.
Okay. So in your time, you started 22 years ago. That's amazing. But only 10 years have you had your own practice, or no, 2010. So what is that?
So 15 years now.
15 years.
Start in June, it'll be 15.
So what made you decide to do that?
Well, as I mentioned, watching my uncle do that, that was always my goal. And so I know a lot of people in law school wanted to work for the big law firms and do different specific things, but I really just wanted to open up my own office. So in 2010, I had the opportunity, and really what happened was I started out in Arizona. I worked at a prosecutor's office for a couple of years, and then I just decided I'm just going to do something unexpected and crazy, and I moved out to Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow.
And didn't have a job or anything, just moved out there.
Yeah.
And I wasn't married at the time, so it was pretty easy to do. And I got licensed there. Then I met my wife, and she was in Utah at the time, so I moved there and got licensed in Utah and worked there for a few years. And then we came back to Arizona, and I got a job at this firm in 2009. And I was expecting to be there for a while. But then my wife's job, they didn't want to lose her because she was doing a great job for them. And so they offered her to work remotely, which sounds really common now.
Yeah.
But back in 2010 or 2009, 10, it was rare. And so she kept her job. And basically at that point, it was like, well, we could get by on that job. This gives me the opportunity to start now instead of 2 or 3 years from now.
So what does she do?
She was working for a software company, and she was working in the sales department. She wasn't a salesperson, but she was the one who kind of organized all the sales opportunities and kept track of that. She was an analyst, basically.
Okay.
So what does that look like, starting your own business from scratch and having to build up your base? How did you do that?
First, I started with a virtual office, and I mostly did my work at home, but I had a place where I could meet with people. It was in downtown Gilbert back before it really blew up there. Yeah. And so, but other than that, it was pretty basic. Starting a law office is really just a matter of getting your name out there and finding a way for people to clients
How
to
do you
find
do that?
Yeah,
We have a lot
especially
of
before
people-
social media.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there wasn't really so much social media, but there's always been companies that specialize in getting leads for lawyers. So you have to pay for that. So obviously you'd like to move forward to a different way that you get clients without having to constantly pay for those referral sources. But you can pay for referrals, and that's what I did mostly. Back in those days, it still wasn't even that uncommon to have an ad in the yellow pages or something like that.
Right, yeah,
It was kind of
totally.
dying out, but it was still pretty
Yeah.
common at that time. But there were things you could do.
So
and so I'd
ads.
say within a year, I was pretty much working full time.
And then does it become like word of mouth after that?
Yeah, somewhat.
Okay.
I definitely get calls from word of mouth or previous clients
Sure.
and things like that. But still, social media is a big thing. Google's still a really big thing.
Yeah.
Whether you're paying for ads or even just organic or
Mm-hmm.
the legal service ads and all those things. Those are big. Those are all big.
So you were doing bankruptcies, which after the market crash, that was probably unfortunately,
Yeah.
booming.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I ended up in doing that. And I kind of missed the really big boom of probably 2008 and 9. But still, 10, 11, 12, it was still pretty big. And so that's why I was doing a lot of those at the time. And a lot of people, there's, as you know, I'm sure there's a lot of foreclosures, and there was a lot of bankruptcies, and also affecting the divorces. People were getting divorced and they had no assets because their 401ks had been drained, and they're doing short sales or else just walking away from their homes. And it's a totally different ball game when you're getting
Yeah.
divorced and you can sell your home and pull out some equity from it. And
Yeah.
each side gets something they can use to get another place to live and to start over again. But back then, people were just figuring out how to divide negative equity.
Oh.
And so it's pretty rough. But yeah, I did divorces pretty strong for about 5 years, and then kind of less so for the next 5. And then the last 5, I'll do them if people contact me, word of mouth, like you said. But I don't really spend any time focusing on that because there's just not as many to keep me busy. If you're a bankruptcy firm and that's all you do, you probably have enough business.
Sure.
But it's not enough for people who are doing other things like me. So
Yeah.
So that's those are 2 really heavy and really, really hard things to walk through in life, right?
Yeah.
How do you walk through that with somebody?
So it's kind of funny. It's a good point. They're 2 really heavy things. The funny thing is nobody's happy after a divorce. So you can get people. That's one thing I learned early on is you can help people get great results in court and get a final divorce decree that's really good for them, and they're still going to be upset.
Yeah.
They're still going to be disappointed in the outcome because it's just not fun.
It's sad, yeah.
Bankruptcy is a hard process to go through, but everyone's happy when they get done with it because you just had whatever it is, $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 of debt just go away.
Yeah.
So who wouldn't be happy after that? But the divorce, no one's ever happy with it. So you just
Yeah.
you just learn to deal with it and move on. And you as an attorney, you try to get people the best outcome you can
Yeah.
for them. But you have to learn early on. No one's ever really going to be happy.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so in your world, you get an inside look at people's personal lives, sometimes even the secret personal lives, right? What they've done with their finances, inside their marriage. And I imagine after doing this for so long and having such an inside look at people that unfortunately didn't do it the right way, what have you learned? What are some things that you would share with our audience?
One thing I've learned is because in all the 3 areas that I've focused on, with divorce, bankruptcy, or preparing wills and trusts for people, you look at people's finances, and very few people have money for retirement. That's one thing I've learned, and especially if you look at Gen X or anything beyond that, there's just hardly anybody has saved anything for retirement. And previous generations, they had jobs where there were pensions and
Right.
things like that. But then companies decided in the last couple of decades to transfer that to 401k if you want to contribute to it
Yeah.
anyway. And one thing that's kind of scary is I look at the financial statements of different clients, and I just realized how small of a percentage people have in their 30s and 40s and 50s to prepare for retirement. And so
Wow.
I think it's going to be a big problem in the coming
Yeah,
years.
especially if
would
we
be
have an issue
huge.
with Social Security.
Yeah, and then there's Social Security, but then some people aren't too sure if that's even that secure.
Right.
And I don't know too much about that, but I do know that outside of Social Security, there's a large percentage of people who just aren't prepared financially, and that's a big problem.
Well, that's
What
huge.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ryan.
Well, I was
What
just
are-
gonna- yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
What are some of those life events that lead to somebody needing to have a bankruptcy?
So I would
Is
say,
it, and let me
Sure.
sorry, add to that question. Is it a life event or is it just a series of bad decisions?
Yeah.
Like, how do they get to that place where they're needing to file bankruptcy? And I'll say this too. I remember a long time ago, we had struggled financially, and somebody had said to me, the bankruptcy is a very legal thing. It's there for a reason. And anybody who loans you money, credit cards and all of that, they know that going into it, that is a possibility. It's a risk that they're taking. So I thought, oh, that's like very eye-opening, you know? So anyways, go ahead. What are some of those? Is it a big life event or is it little decisions along the way? What is it?
I think those are good questions, and the answers kind of lead one right into the other,
Okay.
just like you laid it out. So I would say from my experience, it's far more often a long-standing situation as opposed to one specific life event. If there is a life event, it is typically someone loses a job. Because another thing I've learned looking at people's finances over the last couple of decades is most people can't go very long without a paycheck. And if they don't have money coming in, they may have credit cards that they can run up for a little while, or maybe they can get some help from friends or family for a little while. But most people don't have much of a reserve, and so if someone loses a job, that's probably the number one thing.
Okay.
And so if you're out of work for, let's say, a few months, and you run up a bunch of bills, and you just have no way of catching up, that's probably the number one thing. There's also medical events, so people could have a medical illness or injury or whatever, and they can't work, and they're out, so they don't have any income for a while as well. Plus, they could have medical bills. But I'd say most of the time, it's just people who don't have enough money for their expenses, and whether that's not being able to budget correctly,
Yep.
or whether it's someone who's on a limited income and it's just not. There's just no way they're ever going to make it.
So,
But it could be both.
a couple key learnings here: budgeting,
Yeah.
having some sort of reserve and savings, right?
Yeah.
Which is like Dave Ramsey 101,
Yeah.
and then having some sort of retirement built up, right?
Yeah, it's just lacking all across the board, and then going into the other part of it, whoever said that to you was exactly right. So the bankruptcy laws are created by Congress. It's not a loophole or an accident that it exists. And the only thing that's keeping people from filing for bankruptcy all the time is that it has some negative consequences. So your credit score is going to go down quite a bit if you do a bankruptcy, and it may be hard to get loans in the future.
How many years is that a problem?
It depends on different things. So it'll stay on your record for, I believe, 8 years, but it could, the amount of time that it prevents you from being able to get a mortgage could be a few years. And the amount of time that it affects you on being able to lease an apartment or things like that could be even smaller. But those things are down to the individual lender. So some of those things aren't really controlled by government. Like if you're applying for an apartment, it's up to the landlord to decide how long they consider a bankruptcy to be
Right.
relevant to you or not.
Right.
But the bottom line is, some of those consequences don't matter if your credit score is so bad already and you have so much debt and no ability to pay it off in your lifetime or within even a decade or two. Then at that point, the bankruptcy makes perfect sense because, first of all, it's actually going to improve your credit score. Because let's say your score is really low. I don't know what the number is, but let's say it's really low already, and bankruptcy makes it go low. If you're already there, then the negative consequence doesn't even exist. And then the next month, your score improves. And then the next month and the next month. Every month it gets higher, whereas if you don't, without the bankruptcy, you just continuously get those late marks on your credit. So it never improves after that.
Okay.
So usually most people within a year of doing bankruptcy, their credit score is fine and it's not really affecting them much at all in their regular lives. So might affect you being able to get a mortgage for a while, but on your day-to-day life, usually you're in a much better financial position.
Do you see a lot of bankruptcy divorce
Yeah.
at the same time?
Yeah, definitely. So I think most people know, one of the keys or one of the key contributors to getting divorced is financial issues.
Right. We've always heard that's the number one reason, right?
That's what I hear too, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's true. But yeah, a lot of times people either don't know what their spouse is doing financially, because it's surprising to me, but a lot of people just have their separate finances and
That's
they don't.
interesting.
Separate accounts?
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Wow.
It's
Yeah.
to me, it just seems logical to do it all together, but you'd be surprised how many people have completely separate accounts and they don't really know what the other spouse is
Wow.
doing. And so yeah, it's very common to have divorce and bankruptcy go together.
So let's talk about the divorce side, right? And you've learned a ton in 20-some years doing this.
Yeah.
What are some things that you think contribute to divorce that people should know about that they can avoid it entirely?
Sure. So, a couple things that are huge factors, and just factors for life in general. And it's basically, if you hear sometimes, or a lot of times you hear that 50% of marriages end in divorce, which isn't true. There's a whole story about how that statistic is false. But,
Okay.
In which way?
it's just not.
Is it higher or lower?
It's lower.
Oh, okay.
Good.
So first of
That's
all,
good.
when this came out decades ago, it was lower. It came down to basically people not understanding statistics.
Oh.
And so, but it got pushed out there, and a lot of people thought that was true. But then also in the last few decades, the divorce rates have gone down. But also, there are certain factors that are going to automatically increase your odds of having divorce. Or even if you're not married, if you're together with someone and you have kids and things like that, it increases your chances of not staying together. And that's substance abuse or any other addictions. Those are huge factors. Mental illness, like if you're diagnosed with a significant mental illness, your odds of divorce are much higher than people who don't have those issues. And some of those things are outside your control. Some of them are within your control. So that's those are huge factors. But I would say again, the finances, knowing what your finances are and keeping within a budget and things like that. Obviously, spending time together. And taking time to focus on enjoying time together, and as opposed to just
Make it a priority.
Yeah, make it a priority, and you hear it all the time. Be intentional about that.
Yeah.
And otherwise, it's very easy to get caught up in your work and other activities that you're doing.
Yeah, I would bet most don't go on weekly date nights, right? That go through the divorce.
Probably.
Yeah,
It-
probably not.
Yeah.
we don't really get into that too much on
Yeah.
the attorney part of it, but I'm guessing that's true. Clearly, if you have situations where people are being unfaithful, then that's a huge factor, and that's probably people not spending as much time together and as they should, and growing apart. So, being too focused on work, not being able to handle your anger issues. That's a huge factor as well. So there's a lot of
Learn how to
things
fight
that come
or
up.
disagree.
Yeah, I mean, you got to learn how to disagree and
Conflict resolution.
yeah. There's so many cases where you just have people with anger management issues, and obviously that's going to be a major factor in not being able to stay together.
So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, kind of switching gears into maybe more a happier or maybe more pleasant topic is like estate planning.
Yeah.
What is that? What does that even mean for somebody listening?
Sure.
What's the difference between a living will and a trust? What should you have? We want to know all of the things.
Sure. And
Because let me say this, sorry. We went through this not recently, several years ago, and it was very eye-opening, and all the things that we had to plan for. But on the flip side, unfortunately, working with families that have lost a loved one and not had those things in place, it gets very ugly more often than not between the family members that are left behind. So having a will and a trust set up where everything is outlined is like one of the most loving things you can do to those that are left behind when you pass on. And so, what would you say?
Sure. There's so many things you said that I can comment on.
Yes.
I'll start with the last one. So,
Yeah.
I was at a conference a year or two ago, and there was this attorney. There was a lot of attorneys been there, but one did estate planning, and he said it in a way that I just thought was really right to the point. And he said, when people ask why do they need a will and trust and all these things, he would just basically say, because I don't want to be a jerk to my family. And his language is a little more colorful than
I'm
that.
sure.
Yeah.
But he was saying, don't be a jerk.
Yeah.
Take care of your family.
Yeah.
And so basically,
Which means take care of your stuff.
yeah.
Right.
And when I'm talking to people about the estate planning part of it, we talk about having, avoiding probate and making things easier and all that. But one of the things I try to focus on is what you said, which is if you have proper planning in place, it reduces the amount of conflict that your family is going to have. And you think about it. Do you know any family members who don't get along well with each other, who argue, can't agree on things? Well, if you die and you leave behind a mess for them, that's just going to exacerbate whatever problems
we've seen
are.
it.
No, yeah, I've seen it.
We've seen it ruin families.
This is an extreme. This is not typical. What's more typical is people in that situation have hard feelings and then don't talk to each other for 20 years. Yeah. But I've been involved in a case, unfortunately, where it got to the point where we were going through a heated probate and someone actually murdered someone else. Their argument was so intense, someone pulled out a gun and shot the other one. So one family member was dead and another one was in prison for decades.
Wow.
And so it can get to that point. Like I said, that's not typical.
That is extreme, but
but it is not uncommon that people end up not talking to each other for years after going through
or fighting
those things.
over belongings and
or they can't be family members can't have them at the same family functions. And so proper estate planning can help reduce that. You can't ever eliminate it 100%,
right?
Because you can't control people being jerks to each other. But you can reduce it a lot by having something in place that says who is going to do what. Yep. Who's going to be responsible for this or that or whatever, and then what's going to happen. Yeah. And so that's what the trust does. Basically, is it lays out the details of what's going to happen to your assets, how are you going to pay off whatever debts you have when you're gone, and whatever property or money that you have left, who is going to be responsible for taking that and distributing it to wherever it's going to go, whether it's family members or charity or whatever it is. If you lay out all those details and make it clear, then you just reduce the amount of opportunities for people to fight over it. Yeah. And you don't have to go to court and ask a judge for permission to do those things if you've created the trust properly. And it's private instead of court process, which is public. Yeah. And so the difference is a trust and a will are extremely similar. The difference is a will says what you want to happen, but it doesn't happen until you die. And basically what you're doing is you're giving your family a lawsuit because they have to go to court to initiate that and do the things that you've said need to be done. Whereas with the trust, it's kind of like a corporation or an LLC. Like if you create an LLC for a business, you can put property in the name of the business, right? So your LLC can own a building or a business or financial accounts. Same thing with the trust. So once you have a trust, you can transfer the ownership of your property to that trust. So when you're gone, there's nothing that you need court approval to transfer. Whoever's in charge of that trust is the trustee, and then they can just do the transfers.
Why do you think it is that most people don't, or a lot of people don't do that? They don't prepare for that.
People don't want to think about dying, and people think they have more time. It's always something you put off until later. And so one thing you did mention earlier is, yes, it's true that most people who are doing this are typically older, but really one thing I'd like to educate the public about is the need to do it sooner. Yes. First of all, if you do it sooner, you can just update it as you need to. Yes. You don't have to constantly redo it. But also, it may be a low likelihood of happening, but what happens if you have children and you're in a car accident and you both die?
Yeah, or a plane wreck or something.
Or a plane wreck, that just happened a couple times here recently. And then who's going to take care of your children at that point? And
where do they go?
You haven't created anything that says what's going to happen and who's going to be in charge, and that's obviously the most important thing, besides all the assets and debts.
That's got to be a
things.
nightmare.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when I was either a teenager or my early 20s, my grandparents, my dad told me that they had their funerals already paid for. And this was 30 years before my grandpa died. And I was so impressed by that because now as I've gotten older and I've seen some of this, it just alleviates so much stress and headache for the family. So, like you're saying, don't be a jerk to your family, right?
Yeah, and it's a really it's a very very caring and loving thing you can do for your family is to have that all set up and make sure that things are going to be taken care of. And also, I don't think creating the estate plan itself necessarily enhances your estate's value, but it gets you thinking about it. Yeah. And one thing we try to do is I work with some people and I get them in touch with, I work with a group of people who can also advise people on how to make sure they're maximizing their assets and mitigating tax liabilities and things like that. So I get them in touch with people like that. So I don't do that myself, but I'll get them in touch with people who will do that as well.
What does it typically cost for our listeners that want to start the estate planning process and to get everything in order? Give me a ballpark.
So a basic estate plan that's comprehensive, meaning it has the trust, it still has a will, because there's still a value to having a will, but it has the power of attorney for financial, for medical, and all those things. There's various different tools that we use, and we put them together to create a comprehensive estate plan. So a basic one's like $2,500.
Okay.
Now it can get more if it's more complex, and
Right.
if you have more assets that require additional things. But that's the most basic. But it's still comprehensive, includes everything you need.
Okay.
I'm glad you brought up the medical side of things because I think people forget about that component. That
Especially
what happens
18-year-old
if you're
kids.
in a coma, right? Who gets to make those decisions? And then when it comes to your kids, like if you died and they were 15, do they get everything? Or you know what I mean? You can pace that out. That's
Yeah.
what we did with our kids.
Yeah.
Put certain requirements on them for age and marital status and all of that before they would get certain things. So those are some. I'll let you go.
That's a huge factor. So I was talking to a financial advisor just a couple weeks ago, and he was telling me about a situation where a parent did die young, and this family had a couple of like 18-year-old twins, and they each got like $1 million. And he was talking with the mother, and he's like, "Oh shoot, this is not going to go well."
It's not good.
And he came back for a follow-up appointment the next week, and like there were like 2 Ferraris out in the driveway.
Oh
Yep.
my gosh.
And anyway, long story short, about a year later, he had a meeting with the mother wanted him to talk to the kids, but they wouldn't listen. They didn't have any interest. But about a year later, they did want to talk to him, and they only had about 10% of what they originally received, and they finally decided, okay, we better put a plan together on how we're going to preserve this and make it last, because they had already burned through. pretty
Yeah.
much
That's
all of
actually
it.
a fun conversation to have with my kids right now. I have 18, 16, and 13. What would you do with $1 million if mom and dad were gone right now?
Yeah.
Just to see what they would do.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so you can definitely you can either make it a certain age, or you can space it out over a period of time as well. But the coma is definitely important, and it doesn't have to be a coma. It could just be something where you can't.
Stroke.
Could be dementia, or
Yeah.
stroke, or
Yeah.
whatever. But I had a situation where it wasn't necessarily a medical issue that left someone in a problem, but you could reach a certain age where maybe because of dementia or something, people start taking advantage of you too. Someone starts getting involved in, and it could be a caregiver, or it could be, I had a situation, the guy was almost 90 years old, and a very, very young woman convinced him to get married. And I mean like 20s or something.
Yeah.
And she was working with a group and basically just bleeding him dry. But he had an estate plan in place, and some people noticed, and they got a hold of the lawyers that had created the estate plan, and they went to court, and they were able to say, hey, there's a power of attorney in place,
Yeah.
and his financial decisions need to be turned over to this person because
Yeah.
he's no longer able to
Yeah.
make decisions in the best interest. And the judge agreed, and still lost some money, still lost a considerable amount, but they were able to stop it before his entire estate was eliminated.
I was just at the bank last week, and an older lady was there talking to the teller, and I could hear her, and she's like, my nieces and nephew, I think they're stealing money from me, and I keep sending them money, and how do I stop this and all this stuff? And I felt so sad for her
Yeah.
because she didn't know. So yeah, having those things in place. Another thing that is very interesting that I didn't think about this. So my oldest is 19. Well, once she turned 18, she could go to the doctors, do whatever, and I had no say over any of that. But there are forms and documents that we can put in place that will still give me the ability to help her with that stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, if she signs something agreeing to that, then absolutely.
Yeah.
So basically, I mean, essentially, that's just kind of a contract.
Right.
You're saying I agree to this, and it's revocable. So she could withdraw that consent at any
Sure.
time.
Is it a medical power of attorney? Is that what it is?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
And so you can have you can prepare documents that can pretty much fit whatever your needs are. There's kind of some general ones that are typically used, but they can be unique for whatever circumstances you need them.
Because if she were to get in an accident and again be in a coma or whatever, it would be a lot harder for me to make decisions on her behalf without those in place.
Yeah.
And that would be devastating.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you can absolutely have that. And it can be, sometimes those things are in place and they're effective right now. Other times you can put a triggering event. So
Right.
it only becomes effective, like you said, if there's an accident or
Right.
something and they can't make decisions on their own behalf.
It is the weirdest thing, though. You don't think about it because your kid in your mind, just because
Yeah.
they turn 18 on the calendar doesn't mean anything's changed. And
Yeah.
then the doctors are like, we have to get permission to
Yeah.
talk to you. And you're
Yeah.
like, excuse me?
Yeah, it's one of those things when you're creating an estate plan for people. Sometimes you feel the need to explain to people how valuable it is
Yeah.
because it seems simple.
Yeah.
Like when you meet with them and you figure out their needs and you tailor their plan to meet those needs, but it doesn't seem as dramatic as like going through a divorce trial or something. But the idea is that it's simple because it's preventing you from having problems in the future. But when you don't have it, then you see the value.
For
yeah,
sure.
it's kind of like life insurance.
Yeah.
I mean, I came
Yeah.
from the insurance world, and it can be devastating if you don't have it,
Yeah.
and you die early or younger than you expected, right?
Yeah.
And the cost to get it, especially if you're young
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and you're healthy, is so minimal. So it's silly not to, but so many people don't do that. They're just
Yeah.
unaware, and they probably don't think they're going to die in their 30s.
Right.
Absolutely. One of the things that brings people in is when they see it happen in their own families,
Right.
and they realize either a parent or a grandparent or aunt or uncle or whatever, someone passed away and they didn't have things in place and it was a mess, and then they go, I don't want to do that for
Yeah.
for my kids,
Yeah.
and so that's what brings people in. And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes someone passes away and they did plan properly and they see how easy it was, and sometimes I get that too. Sometimes people are like, well, it was real easy for them. I want that for myself.
Well, one
Sure.
thing that I'm working on is I've set a lot of those things up, but now I have to make it super duper easy so that if something happens to me, Kara knows exactly how to get to everything. She can access it. And that's another part of the plan that I think a lot of people miss,
Yeah.
is how do you make it accessible for those that need it when
Yeah,
It's time.
I'd say anyone who has a responsibility to do something, if you pass away, they should know where to find it.
Yeah.
Right.
And it should be in a place that's consistent and accessible. So whether it's, it could just be in a desk, or if you have a safe, that's fine too. But
Yeah.
it could just be somewhere that that you know people can find it. And then also any beneficiary should know about it as well.
Yeah.
And then it's good to have an electronic
Yeah.
copy. Like I always save a digital copy for people.
Yeah.
But we always give people a big binder.
Yes.
And it's really obvious.
Yes.
And you can also add things to it.
Yeah, that's what I have.
You can add personal notes as far as
Yeah.
things as well. But you always want to make sure they know exactly where to find it. And anyone who has a responsibility or is going to benefit from that should
That's a
know.
really great point. Yeah, when we did ours, again, it was a while ago, but I went around and told everybody, okay, this is what your role is going to be. This is just so they
Yeah.
knew,
Yeah.
know? There's no surprises.
Yeah,
This
and-
is where you find the binder. Yeah.
And sometimes I'm certain there are wills out there that never got found.
Oh, I'm sure.
And things didn't go the way people wanted
That's a
because
really good
because people
point.
didn't know. And
Yeah.
I was trying to help a guy once. It's just a really basic estate, but his dad had always told him that what he had was going to go to him.
Mm.
He was the only child, and his father was divorced, and so it should have only gone to him. But he told him that he'd taken care of it. But then he also got remarried like a year before he died, and died a little bit younger than expected. And so most of the property was titled together with his new wife.
Yep.
And so the son got very little, and he's like, there's probably a will out there,
Yeah.
but he doesn't know where to access it.
We just had this conversation with my husband and about my father-in-law. My mother-in-law passed away, and my father-in-law's since remarried. And we were just talking about this the other day, that we need to know what his plans are and his intentions and where all of this is. He tells us he has a will, and it's not because we want to be greedy or anything. It's just so that we know, God forbid, something happens. Sometimes as a child, it's okay to ask, and so that you have clarity around that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if there isn't a plan in place, that creates an opportunity to say, hey, let's start working on
Right.
this.
Yeah.
Or make sure, this is,
But
what
yeah,
you want.
but yeah, if there's, it's a tragedy if there's
Right.
a plan in place and it never
Yes.
gets found out.
That's such a good point.
It is, yeah. So
I don't think people think about that.
what do you recommend for people to get started that are going to hear this and now they're thinking, okay, I do need to do something?
I would
Robert.
just call me, but if not, then call someone else at least to at least find out more. And it's so simple to do.
Right.
It's what, like I said, it's if you can do something that's simple right now to avoid all kinds of problems in the future, why not do it? And I think the fact that it's so simple is what keeps people from doing it. Plus, people think everyone thinks they have more time.
And maybe the cost too, right?
And whatever cost is, you could probably. I would be willing to work with people on payments, and I'll bet other attorneys would too.
Mm-hmm.
And we would complete it after the payments are done.
Yeah.
But if you want to space it out, you could totally do that.
That's great.
And so that makes it more affordable as well.
That's awesome.
Nice, yeah.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah.
We love to end on a little speed round. Are you up for our little rapid fire questions?
Yeah.
Okay. What's your favorite color?
Red.
Okay, that's an interesting one. A favorite food?
I'd have to go with the hamburger.
Oh,
That's a good
from where?
I guess I'll say In-N-Out.
Yeah.
I knew it.
That's a top one.
Do you have a favorite drink?
Dr. Pepper easy.
Oh, okay, good one.
You and my wife?
What about a favorite book?
I really loved Catch 22.
Oh,
I can't remember the author's name, but it was great.
okay. This
Catch
is
22.
an interesting one. Do you have a favorite sound?
I guess not.
No?
How about kids laughing?
Oh, I love
Okay.
it.
That's a good one.
Okay, what about a favorite podcast? Are you a podcast listener?
I do listen to a few. I've been going through, it's kind of random. I've been listening to this podcast where they talk about every episode of this old TV show, WKRP in Cincinnati.
Okay.
And they go into all kinds of details about everything about every episode. It's kind of
That's cool.
It's kind
That's
of weird,
cool.
but it's kind of
I
interesting.
remember that show.
Yeah, they'll talk about what posters are on the walls and
Interesting.
what music plays at different times, and it's kind of an interesting podcast.
I love
cool.
that. That sounds like where you could just listen to it and unplug from all of life and just, I love that. Okay, last but not least, do you have a favorite vacation?
Yeah, I think I've visited London a few times. I think that's probably my favorite place to go.
Nice. Driving on the wrong side of the road. Well, Robert, thank you for sharing all of this with us. I hope somebody listened to this and was inspired to either go out and set up their will and trust, or follow up with their parents to make sure they have one in place, or even just start thinking and saying, okay, I need to get this going. And I love that you're willing to work with a listener if someone thinks, okay, well, I can't afford it, so I can't do it. Don't let that be what stops you. Reach out and get that process going. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Real Deal podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe, and you can follow us on social media at the Home Selling Team AZ.